These employers have a fiduciary responsibility to their employees to obtain the best care at the lowest price. That's the reason to do this right now. In addition to, of course, doing the right thing for your employees. That's the live exposure, not you picked the wrong design. It's you let a party in interest take unreasonable compensation out of plan assets. A 38,000% markup. And they allege it wasn't isolated. When an employer hears that, the 5,500 stops being abstract. Government never moves as fast as we would like. The prudent move for an employer is to be able to show they look, not to wait and do nothing and find out.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Moving to Value Unscripted. My name is Dr. John Rodas, and I'm a recovering ex-hospital president and the president of the Moving to Value Alliance. Our mission is to advocate for a value-based healthcare ecosystem with the highest quality outcomes at a reasonable cost for our communities. I want to thank our members whose support makes this podcast possible. We'd like to give special recognition today to our trade member, Southern New England Healthcare. I'm joined by my fellow board members, Kim Lynch and Donovan Pyle.
I'm Kim Lynch, founder and CEO of Metis Health Technologies, where we help clinicians and healthcare organizations align revenues and deliver better patient care. I'm originally from Michigan, now based in DC.
And I'm Donovan Pyle, CEO of Health Compass Consulting, author of Fixing Healthcare, and senior advisor at the Validation Institute.
Our guest today is James Murray, the founder and managing director of Murray Strategic Healthcare Ventures. James has decades of Wall Street capital markets experience, meaning he's deeply familiar with the hidden, highly consolidated financial structures that drive up corporate health spend. Through his advisory group, James now empowers self-insured employers and independent pharmacies to break free from predatory marketplace tactics, encouraging employers to act as true fiduciaries of their health plans. He helps plan sponsors use Public Form 5500 data to force fee transparency. His framework offers a tactical blueprint for how employers can reclaim their financial autonomy, eliminate hidden administrative profit, and protect their workforce. James joins us today to map out how changing the PBM conversation is essential to transforming healthcare in this country. Welcome to Moving to Value Unscripted, James.
Thank you for that introduction, Doctor. Appreciate that.
First, call me John. Call me John, James.
Yes. Okay, John.
Unless you want a pap smear, I can't help you. So remember, I'm an obstetrician. So,
Okay.
but James, let me thank you so much for joining us, and we're really looking forward to today's conversation. So let me start, if I can, by our usual opening question. Our experience has been that for a lot of folks, there was some event, an epiphany, or a person that was very influential in getting them to where they were to where they are today. Because if I understand a little bit about your background, your kind of background is kind of healthcare informatics and economics, right? How did you get here?
Right. Of course, I've always had an interest in healthcare and analyzing the healthcare industry. I started in the early 90s with the largest investment bank on Wall Street. And at that time, the new innovative healthcare solution was telephone. It was a company called Access Health Marketing, where you picked up the phone and you called a nurse and you were directed to the appropriate level of care within the HMO. So I've always had an interest in and now as I sit here and I look at our healthcare system, and I'm also familiar with Silicon Valley and of course what's gone on in this country in terms of the technological advances we've made, and I look at the healthcare industry and we just haven't kept up with it. How is it that the nation that leads the world in technological innovation, we can't get our healthcare system right? So
we're still using fax machines, James. Yeah, I know. Keep going. Go ahead, please.
So I spent a lot of time on Wall Street, and then I've had an interest in healthcare always, of course. But then as I aged, and I realized that health is the number one asset that we can protect. I have my own personal experience with my father, who has Parkinson's disease, and he's been battling that for 9 years. So I've taken an interest in healthcare and wellness, and this led me into founding Murray Strategic Healthcare Ventures, where I started off advising pharmacies, and I, of course, still do that, independent pharmacies. But then right now, trying to link up the self-insured employers with independent pharmacies, because there is some changes that have gone on in the industry and with the law, and I think it's a productive endeavor.
So let me, if I can, just tee it up. In my introduction, I referred to the IRS Form 5500. So I know as a former president of a company, we had to file a Form 5500 every year, right? And if I remember, it's because to show that employers are complying with ERISA laws that are, date back to the 70s regarding how we manage our employee benefits, right? To make sure we're complying with the law. And as I was reading that today, I said to myself, oh, wait a minute. But the Consolidation Appropriation Act in 2020, which of course became law in 2021, no, almost 5 years later, had very clear language about disclosure fees for brokers. And we know from having done now many podcasts that most employers are still ignoring that component of the law, do not know anything about their brokers' fees and compensations. Do I have any of that right? And just tell me and tell our listeners how that form can help employers start to get a little bit of a pull the curtain back on some of this, if you could.
Right. So the money is already public. Every self-insured employer files a Form 5500 with the Department of Labor, and the patterns are sitting in plain sight. Nobody's reading them. So they're available. So I have, for specifically how to go obtain that, I've made some publications and a couple articles on LinkedIn about how to do that with some instructions, but I'd be happy to go through the details. But it really is just going through, it basically is it's a Department of Labor search, and then it's just looking at the at the details of that Form 5500. So I did some research.
What is the information in there that they're going to look at and say, ah, that some light's going to go off. So wait a minute, I didn't know that, or what the heck are we doing? Or, oh boy, we're not complying with the law, or we're not optimizing our employees' money. What are they getting in there that's going to shift their mindset, I guess?
Well, okay, let me just give you what I know, what I can tell you from what I found in the searches that I've made. One example, one self-insured manufacturer, this is 350 lives. The PBM, or pharmacy benefit management compensation, grew from $659,754 in 2020. This is one example to over 1.2 million
Wow,
4 years later.
almost double.
Well, it's a 92% increase on a flat covered life count, meaning the number of members didn't change. The
Wow.
5 year total, 4.7 million, same broker named all 5 years. So on this particular example, the self-insured employer, they know that they're funding these through the ESOP, the Employee Stock Ownership Program. The same company is employee owned. The ownership stake grew 95%, or excuse me, 85%. Well, PBM compensation grew 92%. The employees who own the company are paying the thing that erodes what they own. So this is one example, and I'm telling you,
Yeah.
when I have an institutional type tool to pull this stuff, and I'm looking throughout the country, this is rampant. This is widespread because no one, for whatever reason it is, and we can probably have a lot of discussion about what that reason is, but they're not looking, or they don't know what the solution is. They may know the problem, they don't know the solution because there's not really a market to resolve it. There's a West Coast employer, 470 lives. The carrier owned PBM paid 172,000 in drug rebates to the carrier, not to the employer plan. And it was labeled prescription drug rebates and related administrative fees. The plan's own filing shows the PBM as a negative number. The rebate went to the carrier. And that is exactly the CAA
Shocking.
2026 problem, named and specific right there. So the disclosure gap, across all these state samples, there's hundreds of employers. PBM compensation disclosed on Schedule C of that Form 5500 is zero on most of these plans, carrying millions in carrier charges. PBMs sit as the subcontractors to the carriers and the third-party administrators. So their pay never clearly lands on the form. And that gap is the story.
Yeah,
This is
got
what
it.
Right. Okay. So James, yeah. So I think what you're saying is the Form 5500s don't include the whole story, right? I mean, 5500s include the direct compensation, but they don't include indirect compensation. And is that why the Consolidated Appropriations Act was necessary? The broker transparency rules?
that's essentially the reason for CAA 2026, which requires them to disclose the PBM compensation.
So James, why aren't most employers aware of these potential conflicts of interest? It's one thing if the PBM's rates, fees doubled, and they doubled because they were doing a good thing, right? They got paid more for delivering more value. But is that that may not be the case. So why aren't employers aware of these things?
It's a good question. It's a really good question. I don't have an answer for this.
Yeah.
It's been there. The CFO or the officer, the company's signing off on them. Someone knows.
Let's jump into that for a second. So I'm on a board of a not-for-profit, and I've actually raised this question myself as a trustee. So, hey guys, are we complying with the law regarding our broker? And I'm not even sure myself of how good the answer was, to be frank. So I'm probably gonna pursue it myself. But employers have, and we've had lawyers on this podcast to articulate this, and they go back. Some of these lawyers went back 40 years to the early days of ERISA, and they said, until there was litigation, nobody really started complying with the ERISA laws either. And then people woke up, and there's been some litigation, as you know, in this space. A lot of it hasn't gotten quite to the final adjudication. That maybe that's part of the problem. But I guess to Donovan's question, when you talk to employers, you talk to self-insured employers, talking about a Form 5500 sounds a little bit abstract to me as a former employer. What's your pitch regarding this is why you need to do this? Is it you need to comply with the law, which is, by the way, good enough reason? Is it because you're robbing your employees of their money and not optimizing what you should do? You're losing money that you could put back into your company or put back into your employees' salaries. What's the sales pitch, if you will?
Well, it's all three of those. Look at this CAA 2026. It's a political thing. They passed it, but actually there's no direct rules in place right now to enforce it. So the Department of Labor has it's out for public comment right now in terms of, they're trying to get some standards for enforcing it. But right now there's nothing to enforce it. So really the pitch is this is what's going to be, this is what's coming, this is what the law is as of February. You need to, it'd be a good idea to comply with the spirit of the law. And then also it's a good thing for your employees and to save your company money.
Let me just follow up on that. So let's shift gears a little bit to tie the pharmacy business, because I know that's really your passion is this. And so as a former employer, when I looked at our healthcare spend, right, and all employers, this what I'm about to say probably holds true for almost all employers, self-funded unions, whatever they are. A third, 30, 40% of the total spend is kind of hospital care. And trust me, as a former hospital executive, there's a lot of opportunity for cost avoidance there, but we're not going to talk about that today. But a good chunk, 30% or so, is usually on pharmacy spend. And when you look in the weeds on that spend, a handful of drugs often account for 80%. And if I'm wrong on these numbers, please jump in and tell me. But I think a handful of drugs often account for 80% of the spend. And a lot of these are both high-cost drugs and high-cost venues of administration, like my old shop, hospital infusion centers, as opposed to outpatient or home. Is that part of the story here? And if so, please elaborate.
Absolutely. And this is the problem I'm trying to solve, because if a self-insured employer can carve out those specialty therapies, those specialty drugs to an independent pharmacy, they can dramatically reduce their costs. You're correct about that. Those specialized therapies make up a vast majority of the pharmacy spend.
So James, why, if there are all these opportunities out there, why aren't more employers recognizing them and pursuing them?
What I've experienced is that you have a situation, an entrenched situation where you have for years, you've got the standard operating system. You have the broker, you have the third party administrator, and you have the self-insured employer. And you have different, there's financial incentives built into that system. So for instance, you talk about carving out this specialty pharma or pharmaceutical cost. Well, that requires the third party administrator to play ball, for lack of a better description, they have to be amenable to carving that out and administrating it. And so you only have, of the covered lives, typically it's 30 to 40% of those covered lives are actually receiving prescription medication. So if you have a entrenched third party administrator that's not that will claim that they can't do the carve out, you've got, then that's where we're getting the roadblocks.
Would you say,
And go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask you to expand on the roadblocks and particularly with the carrier loyal TPAs. How can you tell on the PBM question and more broadly when someone is working with you and they're, a good partner versus someone who's maybe giving you lip service and is in fact a very bad partner?
I mean, it's hard because a lot of them are blind to the financial incentive that is being hidden by this whole system.
Intentionally obfuscation.
On
Right.
purpose.
Yeah.
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 I think James, I'm just curious if you have, I always think in terms of what's going to be the simplest for the folks on the ground to take this advice. And so I always think in very simple, what does good look like? What does bad look like? And one of my go-tos in any of these conversations is data sharing. Are you getting the data that you expect? And we know that many employers are not. So even at that most basic data request level, I hear of many employers being thwarted by their TPAs even though there's all the requirements that they need to produce that data, there are delays, it's, old data, it's missing data. So that's one of my tells. If a carrier is sharing the data on time and trying to, have it be as complete as possible, that's a very good sign. If they're not, that is probably a bad sign and a tell that you've got some issues. What else is on your list?
Well, I don't really get into trying to advise the self-insured employer how to tell about this because I'm trying to align interested parties, and that's one of the things I was going to bring up to the group is this is what this system we need a little help. I need some assistance from the group because I can't go in and try to tell a self-insured employer, hey, this is what you need to look at, and that's a that's a hard pitch when you're meeting someone for the first time and they don't know you. It's a bit of a conflict. So I don't really get into that.
So James, do you have a process, can you recommend the process for helping employers identify opportunities for improvement? Because from my experience, a lot of employers have been convinced that there's really nothing you can do about this. Just budget 10% every year for this, and that's what you do.
Well, first, I'd encourage them to get as much data from as much data as possible, whether it comes from the 5,500. And then, of course, educating themselves in terms of, how much they're spending and how much they don't know. And then, of course, there hasn't been a solution in the market for this carve out. There is a solution, and there's a reason to do it right now because of CAA 2026. And there's another thing that we could talk about is that there's a risk of litigation going on in this country right now. It's not the sky is falling and the self-insured employer has personal liability right now, but that is where the cases are headed. And there's a U.S. Supreme Court case, the Cunningham case, which John is shaking his head. He understands. He's familiar with. So, this is the where we're moving is that these employers have a fiduciary responsibility to their employees to obtain the best care at the lowest price. That's sort of the reason to do this right now. In addition to, of course, doing the right thing for your employees.
We all agree with that for sure, and we're all frustrated on this call here that why are employers, we bang our head against the wall, James. Why are employers not doing what they're supposed to do? Like they manage their pension fund. They're all over that. They have committees. I'm on the finance committee of the group I belong to, and we look at those numbers very carefully, and we ask questions about the health plan. And it's like, oh, we rely on our broker, and of course, no one knows how the broker is compensated. Let me go back to my question about the drug spend, because I think you agreed with me that a lot of the spend, and as you point out, most employees aren't really taking a lot of drugs. So you get only a smaller percent, relatively small percentage are on medications in the first place. And then a much smaller percentage of them are on these high cost drugs, which account for a disproportionate amount of the spend. So I think most employers are always reticent, and mostly CHROs are very reticent to change the plan because they don't want to upset their employees. But this is a really kind of narrow, few percent of employees could be affected by a high cost drug that they're getting at a high cost venue. And there seems like a real opportunity to intervene and say, hey, Mrs. Jones, you can get this drug a lot cheaper at this independent pharmacy, and we're happy to pay for it or whatever. Where does the independent pharmacy, and we all know that there's a tremendous amount of consolidation in the PBM space, right? The Buca guys own most of that space. There's, it's an oligarchy, right? So a few companies own 90% of the market. I think independent pharmacies are a little bit at risk here. Where do independent pharmacies come into the picture with a self-funded employer vis-a-vis these high-cost drugs?
Right. Well, this is exactly what I'm trying to do. These independent pharmacies, a lot of them, the ones that are qualified and that are operations that are compliant, they can provide these therapies, these specialized therapies that are making up a disproportionate amount of the self-insured employer spend, pharmacy spend. And it's a simple contract, a direct contract with the self-insured employer. But I need a third party administrator that will play ball. If they don't, it just doesn't work.
Why would they play ball?
Well, the
I mean, why would they
I
take,
mean, it just takes a very well-informed self-insured employer to tell the third party administrator, listen, you're going to play ball or we're going to find someone else.
Right. And that's once
Yeah,
again
I
where the
mean,
broker
yeah,
comes in.
James,
That's
there are about 650 TPAs in the country.
Right.
Some of them will do this and support this and administer this. Why aren't employers finding them and vetting them and seeing if it's a good fit?
You know, I don't know exactly. Donovan, you raise a really great question. I don't understand. It's something that, we can speculate on, and speculation isn't the greatest way to come to a conclusion. I just don't understand it. Although in my personal opinion is that it's the way that they become accustomed to doing their job.
It's called inertia.
So exactly, inertia is a good way to
Yeah.
describe it.
Yeah.
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 So, when there's no financial incentive for a human resource manager or a benefits manager to do that, other than the goodness of, hey, I'm just going to help my fellow employee here, you get a little resistance and, okay, well, I'm going to give up.
Well,
I'm not going to work that hard.
and truth be told, those human resources officers are not actually usually as in the weeds with the financial components. The CFOs and CEOs often give up the responsibility to the CHRO. And historically, CHROs lose their job when they change the plan that gets employees upset. So, that's part of the reason. I mean, there's books written about this, about why there's that inertia. And one of the pitches I've made when I talk to an employer, and I think you probably can use the same if you ever have a conversation with an employer, is part of the problem from an employer's point of view is I believe, and I think my colleagues would agree with me, we look at the healthcare spend as a fixed expense. And as you know from your college days studying economics, fixed expenses are fixed expenses. They're your rent. You can't really do much about it, right? I mean, you can move, but that's what you got to pay every month to live in a house, or your mortgage, or whatever it is. It's not a variable expense. And if with variable expenses, you think to yourself, oh, I could shop for a better price. And I always use the example when I was a CEO, we had incredible cost accounting systems. So I could tell you to the penny what we spent on ink and toner for our copy machines. So we could shop. I could go to Staples versus WB Mason to get a better price. But we didn't have that same thinking about our healthcare spend. But the reality is, and I think you would agree, that most of the healthcare spend is actually a variable expense. But we just talked about one area, just the pharmacy spend alone. And if you start thinking, if you could switch that gear in your head from it's fixed to variable, all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, this is a variable expense? We could do better. And let's try it. And then you start talking to your broker, and then you ask your broker about their fees, and then you get into the PBM. Is it all true or no?
True. Yep. I agree with that. You hit the nail right on the head there.
All right.
James, you had mentioned the Cunningham case, and I'm curious to hear a little bit more about that. Especially, you hear prohibited transaction claim, and you start like getting really curious of what's happening there. So I wonder for other plan sponsors who have never thought of themselves as having fiduciary exposure on this, what's one decision that they're making today that could be a liability tomorrow? Or what's one thing they're not looking at that could become a liability tomorrow?
Well, you touched on something on the Cunningham case. What this did is it lowered the bar for one specific kind of ERISA claim, a prohibited transaction claim. The court held that to state that specific kind of ERISA claim, the plaintiffs only need to allege the basic elements. They don't have to plead that the exemptions don't apply because those are the defendant's burdens to prove. In plain terms, it basically got a lot easier for these cases to survive a motion to dismiss and reach discovery. Second, that theory got tested on a health plan in March of this year. A federal court in New York let the prohibited transaction claim in Stern versus JP Morgan Chase proceed. And there, the PBM there was CVS Caremark. It was the first time a court allowed a suit against a self-insured employer over excessive prescription drug costs to survive dismissal on the merits. So this is the nuance most people get wrong. In Stern, the court actually threw out the big claims, the breach of loyalty and breach of prudence. The judge said decisions like, which pricing model that the company has to use or design the formulary, what cost sharing to set. Those are the settler's decisions, and we're not going to get involved in those. The business design choices, they're not fiduciary acts. You can't be sued for fiduciary breach over the plan design choice. But what did survive was narrower. And here's the thing that paying the PBM what is actually received through the spread pricing and retained rebates was a prohibited transaction because the total compensation was unreasonable. That's the live exposure, not you picked the wrong design. It's you let a party in interest take unreasonable compensation out of plan assets. So the fact getting everyone's attention, the plaintiff alleged a 30-unit prescription of a generic MS drug that retailed for $11 to $35. It cost the plan $6,229, a 38,000% markup. And they allege it wasn't isolated. When an employer hears that, the 5,500 stops being abstract.
Yeah.
But I want to point something out that the J&J case, the Johnson & Johnson case, the Wells Fargo case, both of those, they got dismissed on standing. So the same plaintiffs' firms actually on that case. So the sky isn't falling, the theory is narrow and still developing, but the direction's clear. The prudent move for an employer is to be able to show they looked, not to wait and do nothing and find out.
Yeah, we've been singing that song for a while. At least start by looking under the hood, looking at what you're paying your brokers, looking a little bit at where your spend is, try to take advantage of a competitive marketplace. And we're all, like I said, beating our heads against the wall that employers are just not doing it, despite double-digit increases year over year over year. And at the end of the day, it's the middle class, for the most part, that have been robbed in this country for the last couple of decades because of this, right? Because the rich people, they're fine, and poor people are kind of fine because, they're not fine, but they at least Medicaid, they have some kind of fallback. The middle class has just been, this would have been their salary increases, or they're paying higher in co-pays, deductibles, premiums. They're the ones getting whacked. Right.
Well, it's on the you raise a great point, the economics of it. Yes, the guy first, you think about the ESOP program, that's their retirement. You're taking from retirement assets, especially the ESOP program, really they're not productive dollars. There's that component, and then there's a component also when you have artificial increase in prices due to all these hidden costs. It causes the price of everything to go up. It's an artificial floor essentially. And in economics, this is not an ideal situation. So obviously, you don't have to have an economics degree to understand this.
I think that part of it, James, is what I hope all of our listeners hear unequivocally, that if you are feeling the squeeze right now as an employer in HR, as an employee, you're not wrong. You are being squeezed, and you've laid it out quite plainly. Like, yes, it is your retirement, it's your potential wage increase, right? It's more and more and more is going into this black hole that has been perfectly constructed for many employers to disregard, to treat it as a fixed cost that they really don't need to pay attention to. I'm wondering what kind of call to action you might give to say there is real opportunity in this moment to reset the table, to align the care that we want for ourselves and each other with the tremendous financial resources that we are paying into this system. Do you have a thought on what that kind of call to arms is? Because I hear you on the wanting to align. And I think that's where most folks are, but that alignment has to be real. It can't just be lip service because people are feeling the economic and clinical strain of this current system is making things worse.
Right. Well, you need the heads of these companies to take a more serious look, and just a blessing from the leader of the company to the HR department to say, listen, I want you to really take a look at this. And if you need more resources to do it, okay, you've got it.
At a population level, and I'm curious if you have thoughts on this, James, I would imagine, right? There's the one phone call example, like you're saying, but across a population of 1,000 employees, 10,000 employees, these changes start having very material impact on the health of your employees and retirees and the cost, right?
Right.
Like,
And you're making right.
please.
And what you're making is you're making the point of this is a productive use of energy, of time to invest in your own employees.
James, do you have any direct examples? We talked about direct contracting with independent pharmacies, and we love direct contract with physicians. We think that's, for especially for a local entity. We've talked to the Rosen folks in Orlando, and they've saved a lot of money for their employees over the years, and they're fortunate that they're in a relatively consolidated market in Orlando, so they have a lot of options and competition to take advantage of. And a lot of employers in this country are relatively small employers that have less employees, that have less than 1,000 employees. They tend to be concentrated in a single town, single market. Their employees live in a small geographic area, which means very conducive to working, like you said, with an independent pharmacy that are being squeezed kind of out of the business. Do you have some examples of any companies that you're familiar with that have actually done this and said, okay, look, we've looked at the data, we've figured out where our costs are, we know we could do better, and we've worked with Joe's pharmacy down the street, and he's really, or she's helping us with our employees? Do we have any of those?
It's a new emerging opportunity. It hasn't been done widespread nationwide. In Iowa, there's pockets. It is currently going on in Iowa. Nationwide, there are some direct contracting, but it's not really direct. It's through a larger carrier, that's outsourcing it. So we still have that middleman, administrating it. So it's not really a direct contracting model. So the short answer is no, it really isn't developed through this country. I see an opportunity for it because it really could develop, and there's a lot of value add that could take place.
Obviously, it's a tough subject for a lot of people to get.
Yeah.
We start talking about IRS forms and PBMs. I think a lot of people get a little confused, but we all keep saying this. You got to freaking start somewhere.
I
just,
wonder.
just start somewhere, right?
Yeah. No, you just have to start, and the ink is on some contracts. So it is, it's not dry yet, but I am putting them together.
With that in mind, let me try to bring us full circle here and talk about, the future. My good friend and colleague Steve Schutzer always likes to ask this question, which is, putting on your blue sky thinking cap, what's the next few years look like? And is it costs are going to drive this, maybe litigation, but what do you think is going to happen over the next, let's call it 3 to 5 years in this space in particular?
Well, in this space, I think CAA, Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2026, I think eventually the Department of Labor, they get the enforcement standards they need, and they start over the years, it starts pushing people in the direction to remove this PBM issue. And eventually, I think we're moving in the right direction. Of course, government never moves as fast as we would like. It's up to the self-insured employers to take measures to implement it. But I think that it makes sense from an ERISA perspective also, because I think that the courts generally, the way I look at this is you already have we spoke about it earlier, but the trend in the courts right now. Once that trend starts happening, it's really hard to reverse in my experience from I'm not a lawyer, but I do have some knowledge of how the federal court system works. Yeah, I think that that's moving in that direction, and it will continue over the years to be implemented. And I think it's a good thing. And I think direct contracting is going to work.
Yeah, I think we'd all agree. I think we talked about often municipalities, unions are also groups that already have, a little more structure and organization, and they also are feeling the pinch here. So I think we all agree. James, thank you so much for joining us on Moving to Value Unscripted. We really appreciate it. And thanks to my colleagues, Kim and Donovan, for joining us today. And we wish you well trying to
Thank
get
you, John.
employers and independent pharmacies together to reduce the cost for their companies and improve the outcomes for their employees, which ultimately is our goal here on Moving to Value Unscripted. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
To learn more about MTVA and how to join our community, visit our website, movingtovalue.org. If you enjoyed this conversation, please follow us and leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening and for being part of this important movement.